Hey listeners, I love making this podcast, and I think it's important work. I love sharing these conversations with you, but it takes time and money to make it happen. I need your help to keep making it and bringing you these conversations. Would you consider supporting this podcast with a monthly donation? Monthly supporters will receive bonus content and access to patron-only benefits through Patreon. You can go to the website, wdtatpodcast.com, and click on support to make a donation or sign up for the Patreon. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your support. In this episode, I answer your questions about things that make the holiday season difficult. You all sent in some great questions, and I hope that the answers will help make your holidays a little better this year. Keep sending in your questions and ideas, and they could be used in a future episode. Now, on to the questions. Welcome to the podcast where we talk about things we're not supposed to, learn how to have difficult conversations, and talk to people about what makes them different. This is the We Don't Talk About That with Lucas Land podcast, where we do talk about that with me, Lucas Land.
It's never the right place or time. It's imperceptible to the eye. It's never the right place or time.
This is the holiday edition of We Don't Talk About That with Lucas Land. I thought it would be good to have a chance to answer some questions, some listener questions about the holidays. As many, pretty much all of us know, holidays can be hard for a lot of different reasons, and I don't expect to solve everyone's problems or answer all of the questions, but if it can be helpful in some small way to people, I hope that it can help. And my parents got divorced when I was in college, and like a lot of people, that's a difficult time and ends up being hard for many years for different reasons. And so a lot of years during the holidays, I went back and forth when visiting my parents, and it's only been in recent years that we've been able to have holidays together, which is great. I know that people have a lot of different reasons that make the holidays difficult, and I also want to definitely say that one size does not fit all. Answers to some of these questions might be really helpful, some of them might not fit at all, some of them might be exactly what you need, and some might be someone else's problem. So hopefully there'll be something in it for everyone. Our first question comes from Dr. Renee Turner, who was interviewed in episode 4, and listener Caitlin. And Dr. Turner mentions those who have passed away. So Thanksgiving, holiday times, and being around family when someone's not there. Listener Caitlin asked about the people who aren't at the dinner table, whether it's through loss, conflict, addiction, estrangement, etc. And so, this year for me, definitely I'm feeling the loss of my father-in-law. While we're not in the same country as our family, we won't get to be around during that time. It's still a time that we will definitely, I'm sure, be thinking of that and feeling that. But you definitely feel it a lot more when you get together with your family and you're around them. I highly recommend the episode number 4 that I did with Dr. Turner because she does talk about grief and loss, focused on kids and how to help kids go through grief and loss, but a lot of it, most of it, all of it has to do with adults as well and how we kind of cope with loss and go through grief. And it's a reminder that just because it's 10 years later when someone has passed away, you still feel that loss, right? There are lots of moments and lots of times where that grief and that loss comes back. I think one thing is to say that it's okay. I like telling stories and sharing memories, and that always is a good way to remember someone. Some of the other things that listener Caitlin mentioned, like conflict, addiction, and estrangement, those are all kind of different things. And I guess with conflict, I would recommend the very first episode on nonviolent communication if you haven't listened to it, and the book by Marshall Rosenberg, Nonviolent Communication. is very helpful in thinking about conflict, how we communicate, how we listen to people. A lot of times those conflicts especially in our families and things that are close to us, are more difficult for us to find that way of communicating because our emotions can run really high, and it's hard to remember that. So doing some reading and some studying and thinking about how to respond when conflict comes up. Also have an episode about addiction and recovery coming out in December, in which I talked to my friend Christina Gibson about her work and her experience with addiction and recovery. That is something that can be very difficult, depending, and it can be at all different stages, but it's a present thing in the life of a family. If someone in the family is going through addiction or recovery, I think it's good to talk about it. I mean, the point of this whole podcast is trying to talk more about it. And maybe one theme for this episode is that it is good, if you can, to talk more about things. I think that's a core thing that I believe, and a core belief of this podcast is talking more about the things that are hard to talk about is generally better. At the same time, I don't want anyone to feel guilty or feel shame because they're not able to talk about something, or because something is still very difficult to talk about, or they're not sure how, if at all, they'd be able to talk about it this particular holiday for whatever reason and whatever situation it is in your family. I don't want anybody to feel bad, and I want to make sure people feel and hear wherever you're at is okay. You know, there may be a next step to take, a small step that you could take this year, but wherever you're at is where you're at, and you can't change that, and you can't make it magically something that it's not. And so to acknowledge that and say, yeah, if there's conflict or if there's addiction, hey, this is where it's at, and what's one thing that I can do this year to try and reconnect or try to be healthy myself. So I think that theme will probably come back in some other questions as well. Question number 2, again from Renee Turner. It's kind of a two-parter, but they're similar, related. One was, when will you get married? And also maybe if someone is LGBTQ and maybe the family isn't accepting of their relationships, that kind of thing. And the second one was, when will you have kids? And this could be around, fertility issues they've been trying, or if you've decided not to have kids. Those are, all of those things have to do with the expectations and values that we have, and those are sometimes in conflict with our family, where over our lifetimes, we all grow and change, and sometimes our expectations and our values move away from what we grew up with, and that can be really, really difficult then when you come back to your hometown or you come back to being with your family. I know how many people talk about when you get back into a setting with your family of origin, all of the sudden everybody takes on the same roles that you had growing up. And it can be like going straight back to your childhood. And if that was difficult, or especially if you've changed or grown in different ways, it can feel really frustrating. So even though we grow and our expectations and values change, when we get together, those expectations that others have of us kind of come back, right? One of those being around kids. Parents get excited about becoming grandparents, and there's, I love kids. I have 3 kids. I love other people's kids. I just enjoy kids a lot. And so I can imagine when I'm older being excited about the possibility of having grandkids. And people put a lot of different value and expectations on that as well, right? That these are all kind of symbols of successful children and having successful kids, that they grow up, they get married, and they have kids, and they have, good jobs where they can support themselves, and they're doing well and thriving. And some of that's not all terrible, right? Like we do want kids to grow up and thrive and do well, but it's so easy to have expectations of our kids, or to have those expectations that are put on us by others in our families around things like having kids or not. And I think that's an important thing to recognize, that it's okay. And maybe the first thing is to really come to terms with your own decisions about it. For example, if you've decided to not have kids, that's a valid decision, and you can make that decision, and you don't need to feel any guilt or shame about that. And you having some of that confidence in your own decisions, I think, is helpful when other people don't support you. And maybe one thing is to find those people in your life that do understand and do support you. And one of the things that maybe we should acknowledge is that those decisions are complicated, whether or not to have kids. Dr. Turner mentioned, fertility issues, that people want to have kids and they can't have kids, and that there's a whole complicated array of emotions and expectations and people processing that kind of stuff. And so depending on your own family and your own journey, your own situation, you could respond in a lot of different ways. The other thing about fertility that I was thinking about just now is there are lots of different options these days and solutions, and not everybody wants to do all of them. So sometimes people seem to say like, well, just adopt, because there's lots of kids that need a home. And boy, that's complicated too. Some people have very strong feelings about having biological children, and that can be a very strong driver for some people. And other people want to foster kids and adopt kids, and that's great too. But putting the shame on people, or putting the guilt about doing it a certain way, or them doing it right or wrong, is a problem. The other thing that I would also like to mention is miscarriages and stillbirths that a lot of people have. That's very common. Again, I think it's helpful to talk about these things and say, me and my wife have had a miscarriage before our last child, and I was surprised, that I didn't realize how common that was. And so that's another thing to talk about and be aware of. Maybe one thing I could say at this point that will come up again and again in the idea of conversations during the holidays is that it's okay to speak up about these issues. And maybe you don't need to have a full-on argument about something. You don't necessarily need to win. But I think it helps us to feel good when we are able to say something that supports what we believe. And so if someone says something that is offensive, or I think it's worthwhile to find some ways to speak up. It doesn't mean you have to, not everybody likes to have it out at the holidays. Some people just want to get through it, and maybe you find a balance between, hey, I really want to make sure I know this person is going to say something about X. I want to think about what I can say to stand up for myself and support my side and say, hey, I know you think that. I disagree. That's okay. We don't have to have a conversation about it. But I want you to know that I disagree, and I want you to know that when you say that, it hurts my feelings. Again, back to nonviolent communication, I find it super helpful. So in a lot of ways, marriage is maybe the same or similar conversation, expectations, worries that our parents have, that people have about our relationships or whatever. Another thing that maybe we could talk about, and I'd like to maybe have an episode about boundaries, and there's a lot of talk about boundaries, I think, and people talking about having healthy boundaries. And so there's a couple of different sides to that. Like, obviously, when people are destructive in our lives, and having a boundary that says, I'm not willing to allow you to keep doing something that's hurtful, and I need to make this a boundary in this relationship, for example, is important. But also to realize that it's important to have boundaries that are in some ways porous, that we are also willing to to grow and not boundary maybe is not the same thing as a wall, and I'm not sure we're always very clear about that. And there was an episode of the Swoon podcast about boundaries that I think was really good and helpful, and maybe I'll add that as a note to this episode. The last part of that question had to do with non-heterosexual relationships. So I am a cisgendered male, heterosexual male, and so the experiences of people that are LGBTQ are different than mine in a lot of ways. My experience is very normalized, right, as a cisgendered heterosexual male. This is social norms are kind of built for someone like me. And so I'm pretty hesitant to talk too much about that as if I know. I do try to be empathetic and read and understand my LGBTQ friends in some ways. And so, I as we were thinking about holidays and getting through the holidays, I know if you're LGBTQ or if you know that your family doesn't accept something about you, the seems like self-preservation kicks in, and you just try to figure out either how to avoid as much as possible, either going to family gatherings or avoiding conversations, and just trying to get through the holidays. And, in some sense, that's okay, because you have to take care of yourself, and I'll talk a little bit more about that maybe towards the end. Maybe there are things you can think about. How do I find ways to address it? Small ways, at least to start out with. I think because these conversations are so big, it's hard to think of it in terms of small steps, because we think of it in terms of it's so big. And it is, because a lot of those things, marriage, kids, our sexuality, our identities, those are huge things about us as people. And when we're in conflict with people we love or people that are also our family of origin, then those are big things. But rather than being overwhelmed by it and not being able to make any change, perhaps finding some small steps. What is a small next thing that you can do to address it? And maybe it's just a small statement. I don't want to discuss it, but I want you to know I'm okay with me, and I know you're not okay, but I want you to know that I'm okay with it, maybe. For example, it's just an idea or suggestion. And then another thought I had with this question about the expectations and conflicts with values was in some ways kind of turning it around. I think I've mentioned a lot of times on the podcast, asking questions is a really good way to get curious and to sort of maybe shift the dynamic in conversations. And so if there's a way to approach difficult conversations, or even just approaching the holidays in your family with more curiosity, I read a couple of different lists that had the idea of approaching your family as if you're an anthropologist, and I kind of like that idea. I do think it helps some people probably get some distance from the issue. Our families are so close to us and so personal that it's hard to have that distance. And so if you can some way have a little bit of distance, and then ask people questions about themselves, about other things, and asking questions can be a way of kind of maybe in some sense changing the subject, or maybe redirecting the conversation, or just at least changing the dynamic of the conversation. Because asking questions, I should say maybe like gentle questions. There can be sort of harsh questions or leading questions maybe. So just an idea of a possible way to approach when you know that those are going to be some difficult conversations. Question 3 comes from listener Alexis, and she asked how to teach your kids not to believe all the Thanksgiving mythology when their grades depend on it. And I think this is a great question, one that I've struggled with sometimes, celebrating Thanksgiving and feeling like there's a lot left out of the traditional narratives about Thanksgiving, and when is it appropriate and non-appropriate to talk about it? Another example that I have struggled with, I am a Mennonite. I consider myself a pacifist. I believe in nonviolence. I often would struggle. I used to live in a military community, and so that was very challenging to navigate what I believed with people that I related to and were friends with, and how to be friends with people you disagree with. Part of my journey towards making this podcast, probably. And I remember feeling this need to say something about, I don't remember if it was Veterans Day. I think it was Veterans Day. I'm not remembering exactly. Need to say something about how I didn't agree with celebrating the military and that I was against violence and war. And I remember it making people mad on Facebook. That's not anything new. But it also made me kind of think, when is it appropriate to speak up for those things and when is it not? And we live kind of in a culture of politeness and civility in some ways, where we want to not talk about certain things or have certain things that it's not okay to address. And in other ways, such as like political discourse, it seems that we don't have a lot of civility or politeness. And so it's a weird space and weird kind of dynamic that we have with that. But I think that's kind of related to this question about kids going to school and sort of learning about the Pilgrims, and they, sat down with Native Americans and had this nice dinner and everything was great. And that's not, we know that's not the narrative historically of what actually happened. So some of it could be a good conversation with your kid, it's an opportunity to connect with them, to talk to them. One thing to remember that I have a hard time with my kids is paying attention to how much they are able to listen to, and then how much you're feeling like you have to sort of impose on them as the parent to teach them. So sometimes, they might find that interesting to a certain point, and then they're like, okay, I want to go play Minecraft or watch a video or something. But it is an opportunity to bring it up, and I've had that happen a lot, helping my kids with homework in history or things like that, and bringing up certain questions that they have. And I think encouraging that is really good. We say that we like critical thinking a lot, and then we don't encourage it, right? So the way that our school systems for the most part are set up is not to engage critical thinking. It's more, being able to know what the teacher expects or the test or whatever, and being able to give that back to them. And it's less an engagement in critical dialogue and skepticism and that sort of thing. So I think it's great to encourage them to do that. I encourage my kids a lot to think critically, to challenge the things that they're being taught necessarily right now while they are in school. But I also know they have to figure out, if they are in school, they have to figure out how to navigate the school system. And so that's also part of it. And I think it's okay to be honest with kids, like, hey, this is kind of just the way the system works. And sometimes life is about figuring out how to work the system. We all do that, and we all have to figure out how to do that. And that's okay. It's not all bad. If that's all you do, well, then maybe that's not the best. Finding some balance where you can say, think critically, ask good questions. That's an important part of learning, and that's an important part of life, being able to do that. But also knowing when to speak up and when not to, and those are tricky questions. And maybe it's just good to start the conversation and then be able to continue having that conversation with your kids. I think that is maybe better than once and for all kind of proving to them that your understanding of the history of Thanksgiving is correct and the other is a mythology and wrong, and we need to, stand up for it, stand against it or whatever. Again, maybe some kind of balance there. I think it's a great way to have good conversations with your kids and them be also ongoing conversations. We put a lot of weight sometimes on specific conversations like this maybe, where we're going to have the conversation once and for all, and then that way we can be done and we don't have to talk about it anymore. And that's also problematic, right? Because it doesn't usually kind of work that way. A lot of us have to spend time processing things and talking more about things for longer. So I hope that was helpful somewhat, listener Alexis. Question number 4 also comes from listener Caitlin. She says, also, what about lacking resources to have the holiday that is picture perfect? So why is it that we expect that, and how do we focus on what matters, etc.? And so again, expectations come up, right? Maybe it's from childhood that we had some memories of really great holidays and we want to recapture that, or maybe it's expectations from culture, from movies, from a lot of those things. I have somewhat of a love-hate relationship with the holidays. On the one hand, I love the holidays so much. I love the magic of Christmas. I actually love Christmas movies and Christmas music. And in some ways, I really annoy some of the Grinchier people in my life, and I've trolled them with Christmas music when they just hate all of it, and they're kind of, have become very cynical about the season. But I do remember a time that I went through where I really started to think about all the consumerism that was wrapped up in the holidays and some of the messages that were happening through movies and different things about what Christmas means. As a Christian, I might have had certain misgivings about it being co-opted by culture in some ways. There was a time that I really wanted to write a book called The Real Christmas Wars, and this whole cultural thing about more kind of conservative evangelicals wanting to say they're taking Christ out of Christmas and wanting to kind of maybe turn that on its head and really tackle the ways that we worship consumerism, and that the narratives around Santa Claus, for example, and those sorts of things. So anyways, I'm kind of going off a bit on a rabbit trail about Christmas, but I think a lot of us have that similar love-hate relationship with the holidays, where we do enjoy a lot of aspects of Thanksgiving and Christmas, being together, seeing our kids experience things that are magical, different aspects that we really appreciate maybe about the holidays. And then there's those other aspects that drive us crazy, that all the expectations maybe of parties and gift giving that feel cumbersome and feel overwhelming and feel very, very difficult. And so I think part of it is finding ways, maybe getting clear. One maybe helpful thing is to get clear about what are the parts of an ideal holiday picture that you want to keep and things that you want to get rid of. So some of those things about that ideal picture are expectations from other people, from outside sources, and the perfect meal, the perfect turkey, the Norman Rockwell painting kind of thing. Maybe there's aspects of that you want to get rid of. We all like good food, so yeah, let's keep good food, but how can we do it that's less stressful? Could be one thing. Being together with people you love, whether for you that's your family or that's friends. I know lots of people who have kind of an alternative gatherings for Thanksgiving and Christmas for people in their community who don't have places to go, don't have family for one reason or another. I think that's great. That really, to me, that really embodies more the spirit of those holidays. And I think if you can find some ways to do that to me, that's very life-giving and affirming and fantastic, and doesn't necessarily require as many resources. Sometimes, especially if you're all kind of pitching in, finding things to do with less. A couple of things that have been helpful to me over the years to find alternatives to the consumerist side, and especially with gift giving, were Buy Nothing Christmas and Buy Nothing Day. One was started by Adbusters. I think it was Buy Nothing Day, and it was intended as an alternative to Black Friday. So to say on Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, pledge to not buy anything and opt out of that sort of madness and craziness. And then Buy Nothing Christmas was sort of along the same lines, and I remember on their website they had a lot of lists, really good lists of alternative ideas for things that you could do for Christmas that didn't cost money, were reusing things or doing nice things for each other, or different ways to celebrate that weren't quite so consumerist, materialists. Question 5 from listener Harrison is somewhat related to that, and listener Harrison says, honestly, I find it interesting how there's an evening of Thanksgiving where friends and family show their gratitude for life and all that comes with it, and then proceed to stay in tents outside a Walmart. And I think that's so true. And just naming the irony a little bit, I think is really, really helpful. And maybe laughing at ourselves a little bit is a good start, and going like, boy, we really are kind of ridiculous, aren't we? I think it is important to maybe, this practice of gratitude. I talked with Jeff Hulsklaw in one episode about that practice, and the way that practice can change actually the way our brains are wired in some ways. And so, Thanksgiving is a good time to do that practice, but maybe it's a good time also to be reminded that it can be an ongoing practice that we can cultivate that is helpful in shifting the way we think, helping us be more content. I have a hard time if I spend time looking at Amazon and find things that are on sale, or things that, if I had that, if I had, this new podcast mic, or I had whatever, thing it might be that interests me, then I start to get into that mode of thinking about what I don't have or what I would want. And I'm moving out of that gratitude space and thinking, boy, I'm really thankful that I have shoes. I'm thinking of shoes because I would like some new shoes. But I do have shoes. I have more than one pair of shoes, and that's something to be thankful for. That's not something that actually everyone has. So being thankful for that. Finding small things to be thankful for, it's a good practice. The other thing I would say about this, I do agree that it's good to be critical of some of these traditions and ask good, hard questions about whether what we're doing is good or not, and ways that we can maybe come up with alternatives or better ways to celebrate holidays. On the other side of that, I also know that it can come with a lot of guilt and shame. And we can kind of heap that on ourselves when, for whatever reason, we do participate in, say, gift giving or buying things for our kids, or different aspects of the holiday that maybe we're not 100% in agreement with, but it comes with the territory with our family or with work or with some group of people. And some of us are really good at beating ourselves up about that and feeling really bad about it. And what I would say is find some kind of balance and moderation, where you're one person and you're not going to change the whole culture and tradition of the holidays. So find things that you can do, that you want to commit to, that you feel good about, things that make the holidays better for you, and do those things, but also be nice to yourself, be gentle, be forgiving, and realize, hey, if you're buying your nieces and nephews gifts, that's okay too, and you don't need to feel bad about it. In a lot of ways, we're told as individuals to feel bad about a lot of things that are systemic problems. And so what I would say is, you're one person, you're an individual, you do have your own sphere of influence, you have your own small things that you can do, but don't let the whole system, in fact, that we live in a materialist world and society, get you down, and remember to take care of yourself. So those are all of the listener questions that I received, and I just wanted to share here at the end some general advice. 10 things generally that can help you with the holidays. Number 1, be realistic. A lot of the things in listener questions had to do with expectations, and you have to check your expectations. What are my expectations? Are they realistic? Am I needing to really think, what can I and can't I do? What's really realistic to expect, maybe from family or from other people? And, again, finding that balance. So be realistic and check your expectations. Number 2, stay grounded. Holidays come with a lot of things that are not normal, parties and maybe travel or things like that. Find ways to stay grounded and keep routines. If you have a good exercise routine, God bless you. Send me a message and tell me what I need to do because mine's terrible. But maybe you have some things that are your routine. I have kind of a routine in the morning, and so being able to keep that as I am traveling or doing different things, not having work or whatever, helps you stay grounded and not get out too far of your comfort zone so that you're able to handle and weather some of the harder things that happen in the holidays. I really liked this one that I read. I think it was on BuzzFeed, so good things can come from BuzzFeed. It said, identify your triggers and make a plan. So if you know that certain conversations are going to come up and they're going to be difficult, or you have that racist uncle that you just know is going to say something and blame people for all of his problems or something, it's going to make you crazy. It's going to just make you really upset. Think about that ahead of time and name those things. Oh, okay, when this person does this, I get really, really mad and I can't handle it. And then make a plan. Okay, so you can expect that that's going to happen. You can't, again, back to realistic expectations. You can't control other people, and people are going to do and say things that are difficult and sometimes hurtful. What is your response going to be? For some people, maybe it's planning what you would say in response and then saying it, not to start a fight, try to be gentle, be compassionate towards other people, but also being firm and saying what you said is racist and I really wish you wouldn't talk like that, at least around me. I disagree with you. Please don't talk like that around me. You could say something like that, right? But maybe for you, that's too much. So make a plan. When I hear things that are too much for me, I'm going to go outside and take a walk or do something that's going to help me kind of deal with something that's difficult. So identifying the things that trigger you and are difficult, and then make a plan for what you want to do and do that ahead of time. That way you're not always operating in reaction mode, but you get to be proactive. Number 4, I also liked the recommendation to bring an ally or have somebody that's on call or on standby to talk to. So if you are single or you need somebody to go with you to an event that you're worried about, find somebody that has got your back, and that would be helpful to know you have support going into it. If you can't take someone with you, but you have a friend that said, hey, I will respond to text messages or I will respond to anything you send me, so just tell me and I'll be there to roll my eyes with you in solidarity or something. It helps us to know that we're not alone. And so having somebody either with us physically or that we know we can talk to when things are hard is helpful. Number 5, identify unhealthy coping mechanisms. So a lot of people drink alcohol during the holidays. Sometimes we drink to cope and not to just enjoy. And so identify if you are using something like alcohol to cope with your difficult situations. Try to avoid that. Try to reduce it. Find healthier ways. Exercise, prayer, meditation. For me, I love playing music, and I always feel really good when I do that. And then I don't do it enough. And so make time to do things that make you feel good, instead of those unhealthy things that you do, eating or whatever it is. I used to, oh man, I loved stuffing my face at holidays. It wasn't necessarily to cope with something, but I realized, oh, I don't have to eat all this food just because it's there, even though it's really good and I like it. Because I do remember over a couple of years feeling like I was doing too much during the holidays. It was like I was trying to put on a winter layer or something. Okay, number 6. For some people, going home is a bad idea. I think it needs to be said that is okay. If your family, for whatever reason, is hurtful for you, there's so many different reasons why that could be. It's okay not to go home. We all want our relationships to be better. I think it's good to search for reconciliation and healing, and I believe people are able to change over time and even in very difficult circumstances. But if it's not good for you to go home, that's okay. Don't feel bad. You're not alone. There are lots of people who, for whatever reason, their families of origin have issues that are difficult and toxic, and it's okay to say it's not good for me. It doesn't have to mean forever, but it's okay to say that this holiday I'm gonna not go. I'm gonna for my own health and my own sometimes safety. Like it's okay to not go home. Try to find alternatives. Like I said, I have a lot of friends who host anybody who needs a place during Thanksgiving or the holidays, and I think that's a great way to help other people out and show a little extra love and holiday spirit to other people, to give them a place to go for people who don't necessarily have a place that feels great for them to go to. And related to that, number 7, it's okay to say no. So that might be for going home, but it could also be that party that somebody invited you to, or gift exchange, or I don't know, any number of things that come with the holidays that you can be asked to do, or things that could be put on you as expectations. It's okay to say no. And some people have a harder time than others saying no. And it's a good reminder that you can say no to things, even when you feel like the expectation is there to say yes. And there are you have all these reasons why you feel like you have to say yes. Maybe sometimes realizing that you don't have to say yes is also helpful. Number 8 has been mentioned a number of times, but don't pile on the guilt or shame. We are so good for those. There is an episode coming out with Matthias Roberts on his book Beyond Shame, and he shares this distinction between guilt and shame that's helpful. Guilt is when we feel bad about something we did, and sometimes guilt can be good. If we did something hurtful, we should feel bad, and maybe that helps us say sorry. So that's good. Shame is when we say, I am something. So say I yelled at my kids. That's always my example, because anger tends to be my problem. So if I yelled at my kids and I say, I am a horrible person because I yelled at them, I could feel bad about it and apologize and repair the relationship, but I don't have to heap shame on myself. So maybe notice whether or not you're heaping guilt or shame on yourself, and whether or not it's warranted. Maybe the guilt that you're feeling about not doing something somebody expects you to is not good, and you shouldn't feel that guilt. You don't need to feel that guilt. And maybe it's becoming shame, where you start to feel, I'm a terrible person because I'm not doing this, and I'm no good because I didn't go home, or whatever, any number of things, right? Don't pile on the guilt and shame. Number 9, ask for help. There are lots of ways, friends, people around you that you can ask for help. As I mentioned before, maybe somebody's hosting. You can ask around, hey, does anybody have a gathering, or could I come to somebody's gathering or dinner? It's also okay to ask for help and see professionals. I think I want to keep normalizing this idea that getting therapy, getting help, asking professionals to help you work through all kinds of things is good. It's really good. Guaranteed that we could all use a little more help working through whatever things we have in our lives. So ask for help, and don't wait until you feel completely overwhelmed. Ask for help as soon as possible, and maybe practice asking for help. We try to instill in our culture this idea that we're all going to be self-sufficient and able to take care of ourselves and won't need help from anybody, and that's a real big value, especially in U.S. culture. And it's just not good. It's just not healthy. It's not the way that human beings function. We need each other. We need connection. We need help. So ask someone for help. And obviously ask somebody you trust and somebody that will give you some help. It's okay to ask for help. Number 10, and this is the last one, plan for self-care. If you know the holidays are going to be hard, you know that there are things you're going to do that you have to get through that are difficult. And I mean, there's probably a spectrum, right? And most of us could say, I can imagine someone else has it way worse than I do, right? Being forced somehow to go to holidays with your abuser is kind of like the worst I can imagine. I'm sure there's worse things than that. But we can all imagine situations for the holidays that are worse than ours, but they probably exist on a spectrum. And it's important to say that trauma also exists on a spectrum. And just because somebody might have trauma worse than you doesn't mean that what you have is not trauma. It's okay to say that the holidays are hard for you, even if it seems like for other people they're harder. And so all of us probably could say it's good to plan some self-care in some way for wherever you are with the holidays. Planning self-care, planning something that is life-giving. What are some things, if you're going to have a hard time in certain gatherings and certain events that are difficult for you, what are the things during the holidays that are good, that you do enjoy, that you can get through? I would also recommend looking for, if you are a person of faith, there are a lot of churches, and I believe synagogues also celebrate the longest night of the year. And a lot of communities will have a church that celebrates this longest night service, or kind of a lamenting service during the holidays. And that's a great place to go to be with other people who maybe the holidays are really difficult for different reasons. And for you, the holidays are mostly sad, and it's okay to go. And there's traditions, there are in faith traditions, services and times that are set aside for sitting in the darkness together. I'm reminded again of the video, someone animated a talk by Brené Brown about sympathy versus empathy. And that empathy is really sitting with someone in the darkness, not saying, hey, come up here and into the light where it's way, way more fun. There's something really important about sitting together with other people and being together, even in our sadness, even in our sorrow and times that are difficult, and not needing to fix it all, not needing to say platitudes or cliches that it's all going to be okay, but just saying, this really sucks, and then just being together, even when it does suck. Anyways, that's kind of a bit of a downer note to end on, maybe, but I do think it's important, to recognize there are ups and downs, and it's different for different people. I end all of the episodes so far with this quote from Brené Brown about showing up and being brave. And I say, keep showing up and keep being brave. And I think that's important still in the holidays, to keep showing up and keep being brave. But it's also important to remember to be gentle and be compassionate. There's the other quote that says, be kind, because everyone is going through some great battle, right? A lot of us have our own struggles with the holidays, not everybody else knows that we have those struggles. Or maybe the holidays are the best for us and we love it. We absolutely go hog wild and the holidays are a really joyous time. And then when somebody's down, we kind of feel like they're ruining it for us, maybe. We react to other people's moods. To be gentle and compassionate and remember that everybody's going through something and there are reasons that we don't know and we don't understand. And to be gentle and be kind, especially during the holidays. It's a great time, maybe even the best time, to take those opportunities to show a little extra love and a little extra compassion to others. Thanks for joining us today on We Don't Talk About That with Lucas Land. If you like what you hear, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Help us spread the word by sharing it on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram with the handle @WDTAT Podcast. You can also rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can support the podcast by visiting our website at wdtatpodcast.com and clicking on Support. You can make a one-time donation or consider becoming a monthly supporter through Patreon. You'll receive bonus content and access to patron-only benefits. Thanks for your support. We would love to hear from you. Leave us a voicemail by going to our website and clicking Send Voicemail. Your voicemail could be featured in a future episode. You can also email us at wdtatpodcast@gmail.com. Many thanks to Neil Curran and Infielder for the use of their music. You can find more of their music online at infielder.bandcamp.com. A final thought from Brené Brown. The willingness to show up changes us. It makes us a little braver each time. Until next time, keep showing up and keep being brave.
What are you gonna do?